Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Got a fun show on tap. Georgia obviously getting ready for its biggest game thus far this season. On the road, Deep South's oldest rivalry against Auburn. We are covering that from every angle. Connor Riley going to be a part of the show here today. We'll look at what Georgia needs to do in this game, and we'll look at the nature of the Georgia-Auburn rivalry after some pretty odd statements yesterday from Auburn coach Hugh Freeze. This is really funny if you're a UGA fan. We're going to really sink our teeth into this here for a few minutes because it's just kind of fun to have something to laugh at every now and then, and Freeze certainly gave us plenty of fodder for that yesterday. So we'll cover all of the bases on that, and we'll also try to offer an explanation for a fairly strange statement, I think, in the eyes of most Georgia fans that a Georgia player made yesterday about a belief that Kirby Smart possibly has. We'll cover all of this here before we are done on today's show. Let's get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Obviously, around here, we love college football, Georgia football in particular, and we love during the season the week-to-week stories of how a team evolves and kind of new challenges it faces based on the opponent that it's playing. But that said, let's just be honest here for a moment. You know, the season can be a little bit of a grind there as well because all of us, even someone like me who works professionally in the realm of college football here, we also have things going on in our lives away from that too. And so you have a late game on a Saturday night and you get right back to it the next Monday. And, you know, there is a degree to which, hey, long season can kind of feel like a little bit of a grind after a while. You'll get a little bit tired, whatever else. And so sometimes from time to time, you just sort of need a little fresh dose of energy to kind of get you excited all over again. And this week, we are very thankful to get some of that from the Auburn Tigers and their coach, specifically Hugh Freeze. Now, I got to tell you something. I am blown away by what happened yesterday for Auburn because the whole point of hiring a coach with an SEC pedigree is you don't have to bring this guy up to speed about what matters in the SEC. Like Brian Harsin, a couple thousand miles away from SEC country, coaching in Boise, Idaho. Total disaster as the Auburn coach the last couple of years because he was not a cultural fit. He did not understand the SEC culture. It all basically had to be explained to him, and you just don't have enough time to get a guy like that up to speed. Well, that's why you go out and bring a guy like Hugh Freeze, even though Freeze has had some personal embarrassments and some professional setbacks and things like that. At the very least, he knows the lay of the land here in the SEC. But my gosh, yesterday, and I would say that generally speaking, I'm a little bit more pro Hugh Freeze than not. I think he is a good coach. I think eventually he's going to probably have Auburn playing a pretty competent brand of football. I'll take the future of Hugh Freeze over the likes of Billy Napier, Josh Heupel. There are a lot of coaches who I think that Freeze is superior to, so I think that Auburn made a better hire than, frankly, probably some Auburn fans, think they made overall. So I'm not anti-Hugh Freeze. But my gosh, I've never heard a coach have like a worse press conference the week before a big rivalry game than Freeze did yesterday. He kept saying one like weird thing after another. You thought he was a politician for a second based on all the strange things that he was saying in these press conferences. It was quite bizarre. Starting with this, like the easiest thing in the world to do is just set the stage for a big rivalry game because the whole point of college football sometimes is, hey, when it comes to a game like this, you don't have to say much to get your troops charged up. Everybody knows what's at stake here this week. It's the Deep South's oldest rivalry against Auburn. It ought to be that easy to set the stage for this game on Saturday. But yesterday, Hugh Freeze made it way more difficult than it needs to be. This is hilarious if you're a Georgia fan, very strange if you're an Auburn fan. In fact, we've already seen plenty of social media reaction to this of Auburn fans being like, what is he even talking about? This is Freeze yesterday trying, while also failing, to discuss the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. UGA fans get a laugh out of this.
I mean, I don't want to quote something that's inaccurate, but it's the oldest rivalry in the South for sure. I don't know about nationally, but it's am I saying that correctly? I don't sense that it has I better not, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I'm new here. But I don't sense the hatred that is in some other rivalries that I've been a part of, but nonetheless, I think it's intense. Okay, well, I'll find out. I'm not big on hate. I'm really not. I'm big on just, man, that this means something to so many people, so we should compete in a way out of love for our people, not necessarily for hate for other people. That's kind of the way I operate. But man, I hope we compete because we love Auburn, and it means something to the Auburn people to compete against Georgia. So that'll be my approach, and but nonetheless, that love is a great motivator for me.
So in a roundabout way, I sort of understand what he's talking about there at the end. We say this before and have said it before. I'll all the time say, hey, listen, I hate Auburn. As a Georgia fan, we believe a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. We hate Florida. But hating a team in a sporting sense doesn't mean hating people, and there's probably too much hate in the world as it is. I think most of us have an idea of, while we love on message boards or social media going back and forth with fan bases and ripping into them and them ripping back into us, I would say 99.9% of that's pretty good-natured for the most part. People always give me grief about stuff that I've said, or when Georgia loses a recruiting battle, when some of that kind of stuff, kind of pops up. People are, going to jump in here and they're going to say whatever to me, but 99% of the time, it's all just good-natured. It's kind of the rivalry thing. It is fun to be very competitive about this kind of stuff. It's fun to argue about it. It's fun to take shots at rivals, and it doesn't have to be all that serious, right? You don't have to take it super serious. Now, you enjoy immersing yourself in it, but the idea that you take it to the point where you actually hate a person because of the team they root for, that's probably a pretty bad idea, and I think that Hugh Freeze is not wrong when he says that. But it's just the wrong context to be saying this here right now, because this is the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. And you heard Freeze had to be corrected kind of off the mic of, actually, Coach, they do hate Georgia. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm about to find out. Yeah, you are. You're about to find out in a very big way just how much this Auburn-Georgia rivalry from the Auburn side of things means to those Auburn fans from the standpoint of they hadn't darn near won this thing in 2 decades, it doesn't feel like. And so, therefore, you better believe that part of the reason you're here is because the last 2 coaches that were here couldn't compete with Georgia at all. If Auburn fans didn't care about Georgia, Hugh Freeze would still be up in Lynchburg, Virginia, coaching at Liberty. The only reason why there's even an opening position there at Auburn is because the previous coaches were not winning the rivalry games nearly enough. And in Gus Malzahn's case, it's kind of solely the Georgia game because he was winning the Alabama game actually fairly frequently. So for Freeze, who's like, what's it called? Is it the South's oldest rivalry? Is it the whatever? This just comes across as a guy who surely he doesn't know this little about this rivalry. And it's almost like surely he's not this inept at kind of just sort of stating in simple terms what the stakes are in this game, because on the other side of this, throughout the years, now Kirby Smart didn't say this yesterday, but throughout the years, Kirby Smart's had no issue whatsoever kind of pointing out there are some games that to the fans matter a little bit more than others. In fact, I want to go back to 2021 as a for instance of this, just matter of fact, laying it on the line. Hey, when you play Auburn, there's a little something extra at stake. Kirby Smart knows full well how to say that, says it very clearly. This is what Smart said a couple of years ago.
It's a rivalry game. I mean, it's, so many of our kids recruited by them and so many of vice versa. It's always a rivalry game, and I think that a big part of that is being at your best when your best is needed, and that's the challenge for our guys.
I mean, that is that simple, right? It's a rivalry game. Georgia's got a lot of rivalry games, but we want to be at our best when our best is needed. That's as simple as it needs to be. Hugh Freeze obviously failed to do that. Now, I believe there's a reason why, and I think the reason matters if you're a Georgia fan here. There is a weird thing about when your rival is as good as Georgia is, when your rival is as good as Kirby Smart's made them, all of a sudden you don't want to be rivals anymore. Like, did you do this when you were a kid? It's like, you're playing like touch football in the backyard, or you're playing, whatever, and then when things start going your way, all of a sudden I don't want to play anymore. Like, Auburn is essentially now saying when it comes to the rivalry with Georgia, we actually don't necessarily want to play anymore. At least Hugh Freeze is saying, hey, as the Auburn coach, I know from Pat Dye and Shug Jordan and Terry Bowden and however many coaches that Auburn's had over the years, they've all kind of measured themselves against Georgia in the Deep South's oldest rivalry. But if it's okay with y'all, I don't quite want to be measured by Georgia right now because Georgia won the last 2 national championships. They've also won this thing, how many times in the last 18 meetings or whatever it is. I'm not quite so sure I want to be measured by Georgia right now. So I'm going to try to take a little bit of an attempt to downplay this rivalry. Like in a weird way, as Georgia becomes more and more of like the gold standard, the truly elite program in college football, the Georgia rivalry suffer by comparison. They all seem to mean a little less than they used to because all of a sudden the rivals are like, let's don't quite measure ourselves by Georgia. Let's measure ourselves by the other games that we play. And I think that you perhaps have seen some of this already, and I believe you'll see more of it in future years, where coaches like Freeze, almost like a business decision of, hey, when I talk about with words what matters on the field, I'm going to downplay the things that probably don't lead to the most favorable comparison for me. So therefore, Georgia, it's a rivalry, but what really matters is both teams have fun. We just all want to love each other. We're just here to have a good time. That is an attempt, albeit not a very effective one, but an attempt to sort of downplay expectations in a game like this, you would think. And it seems like Freeze did himself no favors in terms of truly winning over his fan base with that yesterday. But believe it or not, that was not the worst thing that Freeze said yesterday. Now, there's a weird thing about me. The thing that I probably find the funniest in life is when somebody has a very high level of confidence and a very low level of competence, right? When someone's very, very confident while being very incompetent, I find that to be very, very funny. Low information, high confidence is just a really, really funny thing for me yesterday. Now, I want you to listen here for a moment. Hugh Freeze kind of trying to talk to Auburn fans about not having too many expectations, perhaps about this game, perhaps about his first season, whatever else, not having too many expectations. He cites Kirby Smart as an example. Now, I want you to listen to how wildly confident Hugh Freeze is while also being very poorly informed and having to once again be corrected off the mic. Now, here's my rule. If you in a press conference have to be corrected more than once off the mic, that means that things have gone horribly, horribly wrong for you. Very funny for Hugh Freeze being shocked to discover just how successful Kirby Smart was very quickly into his tenure as UGA coach. This is hilarious. Take a listen to Hugh Freeze once again from yesterday.
I don't know how long it took him. I don't know. What did it take him, 3 years or so to get there, or 4 years? I don't know. Some of y'all could do the research, but his second year? Whew. I don't know that that's accurate, but anyway. So he did it pretty fast then. That's pretty impressive. It's even more impressive.
So what he's talking about there is the idea that success takes time. I mean, how many years did it take Kirby Smart? 2, Coach. Oh, well, and my favorite part about this is his thing of, I don't know that that's accurate. First of all, he's like, if y'all want to do the research, as if it required carbon dating to discover, what happened in college football just a small handful of years ago. If y'all want to do the research, like if y'all want to dig through some papyruses or papyri, if y'all want to dig through some of that and figure out what happened back in 2017, yeah, Coach, quick Google search lets us know that he actually played for a national championship in 2017. And Hugh Freeze's deadpan response back is, I don't know if that's right. I'm not quite so sure you've got all your information correct. And it almost kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Will Ferrell type character, something like that. Somebody very high on competence, very low on information. In fact, take a listen. Here's very quick. Ron Burgundy from the movie Anchorman. See if you detect a little bit of a Hugh Freeze level of low on information, high on confidence, much the same way that like Ron Burgundy was with Veronica Corningstone in their famous day. Take a listen to this real quick.
I'll be honest, I don't think anyone knows what it means anymore. Scholars maintain that the translation was lost hundreds of years ago.
Doesn't it mean Saint Diego?
No.
No, that's what it means. Really.
Well, agree to disagree.
I'll probably get dinged by YouTube for playing that, but nonetheless, I sort of feel like I see some similarities there. Hugh Freeze is like, I don't know if anybody knows what Kirby Smart did way back in the second year. That's a little bit like Ron Burgundy saying, I'm not quite so sure anybody knows what San Diego means. I sort of feel like you get some similarities there. Either way, it was not a good press conference for Hugh Freeze yesterday. His first foray into the Deep South's oldest rivalry as Auburn coach, it did not go very well. And now Georgia's job is to make sure it goes even worse on the field this Saturday. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us. No matter how you get to us, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, across all video platforms, Radio Athens, Sports Radio, 960 The Ref, podcast throughout all the podcast platforms there as well. Just really, really happy to have you with us as a part of our show. And just really thankful to have our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia bringing it all to you. Foundation, waterproofing issues. Listen, if you have one of those things going on in your home, you may be fumbling and stumbling around just as much as Hugh Freeze is, trying to find the right words to say, because let's face it, that's a pretty anxiety-producing thing. If you walk down to your basement, you see residue, evidence that water has intruded into your home, the same way that Georgia's going to be invading the plains on Saturday. If you see that water creeping in, you know, hey, got to do something about this. Damp spots in your basement, your crawl space, standing water sometimes, that kind of stuff that gets through there. That is a signal it's time to reach out to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And not only that, how about those cracks sometimes you see them in the walls? Whether it be the horizontal cracks of your sheetrock on the outside of your house, you see those kind of like stair-step cracks in the brick. Once again, that's a sign that perhaps you got a foundation issue going on. And when you see that kind of stuff around your house, I don't want you to like ignore it. I want you to remember what I'm telling you right now, that you can get the peace of mind you need about the things that you're seeing with a quick phone call to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And the cool thing about Engineered Solutions of Georgia, not only are they well equipped to handle your problems as it relates to foundation waterproofing stuff, they've got an entire team of engineers on staff, by the way. Nobody in our marketplace has that level of resource dedicated and devoted to your problems. But in addition to that, they're also proud partners of UGA there as well. So when you do business with Engineered Solutions of Georgia, you're doing business with someone who supports the Dogs, which is a really good thing. They are also longtime loyal friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. I'm incredibly grateful for that. Love their support of us. And so I can very heartily and very sincerely tell you that if you're facing a foundation issue or a waterproofing issue, our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia can cover you on all of that. So give them a call, 678-ESOG now, 678-ESOG now, and take advantage of a fully transferable triple protection warranty on materials, installation, and design. Good folks doing good work for you. Give them a call, 678-ESOG now. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, proud partners of UGA, and great to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily with us here today. We're going to talk to Connor Riley here coming up in a moment. We're going to get more in depth on the Georgia-Auburn game set to take place there on Saturday. We're also going to talk for now around the doghouse with the Georgia side of this too. Yesterday on the show, we spent a pretty good time talking about the Georgia defense and kind of where things stand with that right now, and kind of the realization here for the moment, and this doesn't have to be a bad thing. The season itself lends room for a work in progress. Georgia perhaps right now is a work in progress. The level of dominance that we're used to seeing from Georgia through 4 games, I think you'd have to say, that same level of dominance possibly not here right now. Now, I don't know that I've seen a team thus far this year that I would say is obviously better than UGA. We haven't changed our overall opinion that Georgia will go for 3-23 when the national championship again. That's still the opinion we have about this team. But the way that through even a couple of weeks of last season, blowout win against Oregon, blowout win against South Carolina, you were left to conclude there was no one playing at the level that Georgia is right now. We haven't quite seen that level of dominance enough yet to say, boom, that settles it, that ends it. There is no one right now competing on the same plane as UGA. We're stopping short of saying that right now. This season's going to be a journey. There are going to be challenges. Winning a third straight national championship was never going to be easy, and Georgia's preparing itself right now to face all the challenges that come. We talked on the defensive side about that yesterday. We will look at the offensive side here right now. And the most interesting thing about Georgia on that side of the ball, I would believe, in addition to guys that you're hoping to get back healthy, is the fact that Carson Beck gets ready to step into enemy territory for the first time on Saturday. And this is one of those things that, at the beginning of the calendar year, we have a tendency to kind of look far ahead into the fall and what's going to happen. And y'all, we have been talking about this on the show for months. We were doing this in February. We did this in the spring. We did this in the summer. That idea that you could circle September 30th as a date in which we would learn a pretty good bit about Georgia, because as much as we laugh at Hugh Freeze, the truth is that Auburn's not necessarily going to be an easy out on Saturday. Georgia's about a 16.5, 17-point favorite here, but nonetheless, this is the kind of tough matchup that tough-mindedness is going to be required for. And so even if Auburn lost last week to Texas A&M, and even if this is not a team that's right now kind of on the top 25 radar or anything like that, this is still a pretty tough matchup for Georgia. And as we've been now saying for months, it's the first really big, true proving ground for Georgia quarterback Carson Beck. Now, the good news is it seems like Beck was more comfortable last week than he has been at any point in time this season, but is he ready for what comes next? Now, I thought it was very interesting yesterday that when Georgia coach Kirby Smart was asked that question, Smart gave pretty direct and I would say very candid answer that we kind of would all agree with here right now, that we're about to find out. As of right now, we don't quite know yet how Carson Beck is going to respond to all of this. This is what Kirby Smart said yesterday.
I think that's something that we're going to find out. And I don't think you know. I think he's been through some ups and downs. He's certainly been against good defenses like Auburn has. He goes against our guys. So it's different when it's live. So you got to find out how he responds to that. And I'm very confident in Carson's ability to communicate, to understand things. He's been in our system. You only get good at these situational football things by playing football for a long time, and he's been with us for a while doing it. This is his first chance to do it, on the road.
I think that's just real. I think it's honest. I think it's genuine, and I think it has room for some optimism and some true, honest hopefulness that Beck is ready to thrive here in this environment, but also the realization that, hey, until he goes through it, we don't really know, and whatever his second and third road start are going to be, they are probably more likely to just produce huge success than perhaps what this first one's going to produce. But Beck can show us all a lot about exactly who he is as a football player, exactly who he is, at this stage of his development as a quarterback, based on how he plays, at Auburn on Saturday. And this is one of those deals where, I'm not like some sort of like Rhodes Scholar, some sort of Mensa type guy. I really try to keep things as simple as I can when possible. And, to me, there's some real simplicity here in terms of how you evaluate Georgia here in this spot here right now. I mean, if you look at Georgia through 4 games here, you got 48 points scored against Tennessee Martin. You got 45 points scored against Ball State. You got 49 points scored against UAB. Against the non-SEC competition that Georgia's played, there have been no issues in scoring points, especially this past Saturday. Georgia was 6 for 6 in trips to the red zone in terms of punching tickets for touchdowns there in that spot. But we obviously also know that just 24 points scored against South Carolina. This was the thing that Todd Monken made the hallmark of his time here as the UGA offensive coordinator. In 28 games against SEC competition, he averaged 37 points per game against those SEC foes. So to me, if you want to evaluate Beck on Saturday, if you want to evaluate where the Georgia offense is overall, let's evaluate it based on the amount of points it's able to score against, as Kirby Smart said, probably slightly better than you realize Auburn defense. They brought in some transfer guys. Their overall stat line isn't amazing, but it's not terrible either. This is not a bad Auburn defense here. Can Georgia kind of get back into the 30s from a point standpoint against a team like this in the SEC on the road? That to me is how you judge it. That to me is how you evaluate what Carson Beck truly does in his road start. We know this is a test that Georgia's been preparing for, that Beck himself has been preparing for, and on Saturday we'll be able to see, does he pass it with flying colors? And that is Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia here today. Now, there's a lot else going on as Georgia gets ready for Auburn on Saturday, so let's get ready to talk about that and so much more with Connor Riley. Glad to have him and all of you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let me bring in Connor Riley. We'll just keep this same conversation going. Connor, I was just talking about Carson Beck, first road start. But the Georgia offense overall, we have certainly seen this team has proven itself capable of scoring big point totals against the kind of Group of 5 or FCS competition that it's played. Big day offensively on Saturday against UAB, and that's not meaningless to me. There is some meaning and some value that I do take from that. I thought that Georgia overall looked more comfortable offensively than perhaps it has all year long, and to do that without a healthy collection of running backs and some fully healthy offensive line, I think that says something pretty good about UGA. But Georgia also did not score enough points in my mind against South Carolina a couple of weeks, prior to that. And in terms of where this offense is, what it does against its Power 5 opponents, its SEC opponents in particular, that's really how Georgia has separated itself from most of the rest of the country the last couple of years. Do you think that Georgia is ready on Saturday to come out and put a point total together that's a little bit more in line with what it's done against SEC teams these last 2 national championship seasons?
Yeah, and not to answer your question with a question, but what do you think is the number that Georgia would be satisfactory for Georgia to score in this game?
I'd like to start with a 3.
Yeah, I think that, I think 35, 34 is probably the range that I'm thinking. I'm with you in that, Auburn is a capable defense. I don't know how, elite or high-end they are, but they do have some playmakers who have done some nice things so far. And I do probably think that of the teams that Auburn has played, Georgia, in theory, should have the best offense that Auburn will have seen. And so I think it'll be interesting, specifically with regards to Carson Beck. I think he took steps forward on Saturday against UAB, and yeah, the opponent's not great, but they did go out and score 21 points in the second half of that game against South Carolina. They had a missed field goal there and a holding penalty in the red zone that probably would have made it, either 24 or 28. So really, we're talking about one, unsatisfactory half. Now, scoring 3 points in any half when you're averaging 40 points per game, like Georgia traditionally has the last couple of seasons. It is reason for concern there. And so I think, we'll see how healthy this Georgia unit is. But with what we've seen from Carson, as I think he's continued to get more comfortable, and I think you'd even probably admit, better with each start, I think this Saturday it's going to be a test to just sort of see, how he handles his first road start, given, I would say the game against UT Martin didn't exactly go great at the start for him. And so it's a new experience, and how he handles this, I do think is going to be particularly telling in terms of where this Georgia offense is going. Is it something that, sort of linearly keeps getting better and keeps improving week to week? Or is it going to be, sort of a roller coaster where you have your ups and your downs from a week-to-week basis as Carson Beck sort of grows and experiences things differently there?
Yeah, I mean, look, the one thing that really stood out to me about Beck going to the spring is I just thought he seemed really mature. And, that's possibly it's a tough evaluation to evaluate somebody that you're not spending a lot of personal time with. I'm judging some of this by, just kind of what I see from afar, of course. But to me, the thing that kind of won me over as, when I think Carson Beck's going to be the starting quarterback for this team was I thought he showed an overall level of poise and maturity throughout the spring. Not an easy situation because there's a lot to be gained if you can be the Georgia starting quarterback. It'd be very easy to want to push a little too hard, to be a little too tense in a situation like that. But Beck clearly wasn't. And he allowed, the experience that he had to be demonstrated, I think, through what he did during spring practice. And so I think the assumption I have right now is he is as ready for this as you could possibly be. But do I think he'll play better at Tennessee than I think he'll play at Auburn? I think I probably do, because anything when you're doing it for like the second or third time is way easier than doing it for the first time. So my assumption is that Beck is as ready for this moment as any first-time road SEC starting quarterback could be. But if you're going to do like a daily fantasy game type thing, my guess is that Beck probably has bigger numbers in a road game later on this year than he probably does for his very first, because that's still a pretty big door to walk through for the very first time.
Right, and to that point, yes, Carson's been here for 4 years. He's been in this program before. It's still only his fifth career start. And so, as great as Stetson Bennett was last year, his fifth career start didn't go all that great. I believe that was against either Kentucky or Florida back in 2020, and you saw the struggles that Stetson had those days. Now, yes, he got hurt against Florida there, and that bears mentioning, but the quarterback we saw Stetson Bennett be in 2020 was wildly different than who Stetson Bennett was in 2022. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind with Carson Beck. There's a reason why NFL teams, when they were drafting quarterbacks, for so long looked at experience as sort of a measure or something that would be considered a positive when it comes to selecting guys in the first round. There's a reason why I think there's only been like 5 quarterbacks who have less than 16 career starts taken in the first round. It's because with experience, you just see more things, you know more things, you know more about yourself, and some of the issues you're able to correct. Like, for example, with Carson right now, one of the things, when he feels pressure, and, teams will do this, South Carolina has been aggressive, UAB to an extent was aggressive, I think Auburn on Saturday is going to follow suit. When he feels pressure early in the game, he sort of starts to drift back a little bit and drift away from his throws, and has not yet really shown a consistency to, when he gets pressured or feels pressure over the course of a game, a willingness to necessarily step up and make throws in the pocket that way. And so that's something that just, as he gets more and more comfortable with playing and seeing pressure and getting hit, that's something that you would expect, or at least hope, to get it for him to get better at, to get more comfortable with, and to really settle in that way. So, he's only really thrown, I think, 120-ish passes on the season so far, and these next, I would say, 30, 40 that we're going to see against Auburn on Saturday, I think are really important for him, just in terms of going out and doing it on the road for the first time, and setting a baseline of, okay, in theory, this is as worse as he's going to be, and from a nerve standpoint, from a first-time standpoint, as you point out. You do this a second time, you do this a third time, you do get, you would think, at least somewhat more comfortable with it.
Let me bring you in on a conversation we've been having now for the last day and a half or so here. Georgia is still my pick to win the national championship. I haven't seen anybody else that would nudge me off of my selection of Georgia here right now. So go for 3-23 is still very much intact, I believe. But we are changing our evaluation of Georgia here a little bit. This is not a dominant team here right now. I expected Georgia to perhaps throttle everybody that played this year. I really thought there was a chance the 2023 team might be better than it was in 2022. And maybe before it's all said and done, maybe it still will be. Who knows? But right now, this is not a team that's just, scaring people to the point they quit the sport the way it typically has defensively, or because of the injuries perhaps they're not quite asserting their will through the running game the way we're used to seeing Georgia perhaps do. And so this is another thing about going on the road on Saturday for the first time is that Georgia is perhaps still the best team in the country, so therefore obviously the best team in this game, but it's not the just sort of big bully dominance that guarantees that Auburn will wilt because of the sheer force of Georgia's will here. This is a non-dominant team playing on the road on Saturday, which is, I think reason for curiosity here. What do you make about the fact that Georgia may still be excellent? It may prove itself to be the best, but if we measure this by like a 2022 level of dominance, that's not quite what Georgia is here at the moment.
I am of the opinion that this team was always playing the long game, and I haven't seen anything in the first 3 or 4 weeks now to dissuade me from that fact. Again, college football, it's such a small sample size sport where, again, Georgia's already 33% or 25% of the way done through the season, 33% done with the season, excuse me. And so it's one of those things where, you do lean on, past success as a way a bit more. And again, when you've won 21 straight games, when you are in the process of trying to play for your third straight national championship, that's such a grind, and winning that many games in a row and just playing those extra games. For me, the barometer was always going to be November in terms of, when does this team come together now? They could certainly lose a game in September or October, and that sort of changes your line of thinking. But where is this team over the month of November? Think of it like a race. You want to, try and peak towards the end, and that's something Georgia's talked about before. And so I'm maybe perhaps more forgiving than I should be, with how they looked in this first month. For me, really, it's, are you doing things on a, maybe not every single week, but are you showing flashes where you can get better, and you have areas where, and stretches, maybe not for entire games, but stretches within games, where you do show that A monster. And, I think we saw that in South Carolina. The other thing, too, Georgia's schedule has been so poor that, with the exception of South Carolina, granted a game they were a 3-touchdown favorite, I understand that it's hard to get up for a game against UAB. I understand that it is hard to get up for a game against Ball State. And we've talked about this before, it's impossible to play 12 straight A games. You're going to have some efforts out there where it's not the best. And the reason the Tennessee game a year ago stands out so much was because Georgia was fully locked in and ready to go there, and you saw it early and often in that game. You can't replicate the type of energy that came from that performance every single week. And so, yes, I understand why that can be frustrating to some people out there, but show me the team that has played 4 straight dominant games. Maybe you can say Penn State there. Cool, they just played an Iowa team that can't score 14 points on an empty field. Washington, yes, they've beaten some quality teams, but I don't know how great that schedule actually is when you start really looking at it. And so, yes, those teams have impressed, and I think can give them credit there. But Georgia, because of the fact that they've won 2 straight national titles and are playing for a third one, and even though we're not necessarily talking about that right now, they're playing a different game than every other team in the country. Because while, yes, they're trying to win this specific national championship, the baggage that comes with winning the last two and going for a historic three-peat, even if they're not saying it and even if they're not acknowledging it, it does weigh on this team.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I want to defend Georgia fans here for a moment, and then after this, I've got some other things I want to talk to you about. But I think coming into all of this year, we had the anticipation that the month of September was going to be, kind of not quite so fun. And for me, specifically, what I mean by that is anytime you're evaluating a team by something in addition to just winning the game, there is always going to be fertile soil for disappointment on that. It's like, yeah, you beat UAB, but did you score 100 points? Or, yeah, you beat Ball State, but you let them score, or, whatever else. It's like anytime you're playing one of these games in which the opponent does not belong in the same field as you, we have a tendency to want to set the level of expectation so high that it really can't be reached. But now moving forward, even though Georgia's still on paper a lot better than teams it's about to play, Auburn is the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Jordan-Hare Stadium is one of the toughest places to play. This is a game on Saturday that, in a roundabout way, just winning's kind of enough. And, you look ahead of the future. We're going to talk about this in a moment, Connor, once we move on to our SEC through. Georgia's got 4 ranked opponents in its schedule right now. You look at Missouri better than perhaps expectations. Kentucky right now is at least undefeated. Florida's in the rankings, as silly as that sounds here at the moment. Tennessee's still ranked. That some of these games in the future will also be games in which just winning them will kind of be enough. I'm actually really excited about the next phase of the Georgia schedule because all of a sudden now you don't have to go to the judges' scorecard to judge how pretty Georgia was. There is a stretch of games coming up where, in a roundabout way, just winning them and moving on, I think for a little while here, that ought to be enough.
First of all, are we allowed to call this the Deep South's oldest rivalry as Hugh Freeze is trying to, legislate that out there?
Oh, we're going to get there in a minute. We're getting there in a minute.
It's not a rivalry.
Yeah, we're going to get there in a minute.
Thinking back, 2019, we talked a lot about that game. You and I were on the sidelines of that game. That is the wildest atmosphere that I have ever been in terms of, feeling the crowd and the impact it had there that day. And that was a game beforehand you had said, style points don't matter here, just win. With this Auburn game on Saturday, is that sort of still the case going on the road? It's their first road game of the year. Auburn looked really bad last week against A&M, in my opinion, and quite frankly, they looked pretty bad against Cal, too. Now, they were able to win that game, but, is this an Auburn game where, you mentioned style points and the want to see that. Is this a game where, let's say Georgia 35-14 or something along the lines of that? Is that good enough, or do you want to see sort of a dominant showing, and a chance to really go out there and make a statement like we have seen Georgia do in the past?
It would be more eye-opening for me if Georgia played less than its standard on defense than less than its standard on offense. If Georgia scores a small number of points, I'm relatively willing to forgive that because it is Carson Beck's first start, and Georgia really is, I think, pretty shorthanded with its overall running game. I know a lot of people will kind of lose their mind if it's not a good day for the Georgia offense. I'm a little bit more forgiving probably of that. The thing that would really concern me is, I watched all of the Auburn-Cal game. I was listening on the radio, frankly, most of the Auburn-Texas A&M game because I was driving to Athens during that time. But this is an Auburn team against Power 5 competition that's having a hard time churning out any yards whatsoever. So if Georgia doesn't have like a great day defensively against Auburn, that would be a little eye-opening for me. But for the most part, because of the environment, because of the nature of this season, I'm not going to do a whole lot of beauty contest, judgments on Georgia on Saturday. For the most part, just a win's enough. I expect Georgia to play well defensively, but for the most part, for me on Saturday, just a win would be enough.
I agree with you on the defensive point there. If I'm being honest, Auburn shouldn't score on Saturday with what we've seen from their offense and what we know this Georgia defense is capable of. Now, they might generate a turnover and give them a short field. I get that. If it's 24-0 and that's the final score, 24-3, to me that's satisfactory. Again, it's not exceeding expectations. It's not an A, but you get out of there with that 28-0, 31-3, something along the lines of that. That's Georgia doing what it needs to do and going on the win in an SEC environment and covering the spread, something they haven't done this season so far, as I'm sure you'll love to bring up when we do go with the flow again. But I think defensively the big thing for this weekend is you want to see Georgia have a dominant. I think Georgia needs to have a dominant game there more so than it necessarily needs to have, a 2022 Oregon, a 2022 South Carolina showing on that side of the ball.
No, I think that's right. Speaking of Hugh Freeze and the stuff from yesterday, Connor, I believe I probably like Hugh Freeze as a coach maybe better than you do. Generally speaking, I'm a fan of him on the field. Obviously, he's got some really tough issues off the field, but in terms of what he brings on the field, I think his resume speaks for itself. But as I said before you joined us, the whole reason you hire a coach like Freeze is that so you don't have to get him up to speed on the climate here in the SEC. He's supposed to already know this stuff. I thought his press conference, hilariously so, by the way, but I thought his press conference yesterday was a total debacle, a disaster of not knowing, Kirby Smart's resume, not really knowing how to speak about the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. This was a real unforced error on the part of Freeze yesterday, and I know a lot of Auburn fans who are not happy about this at all. This is not just Georgia fans laughing here. A lot of Auburn fans were not happy about this, and I don't know if this is downplaying the rivalry because of how dominant Georgia is and how dominant specifically Georgia's been against Auburn, if this is just Freeze not really knowing how to speak about this kind of stuff. But in a kind of funny fashion, this was not a good day at all for Freeze yesterday.
Yeah, first of all, the idea that Hugh Freeze doesn't want to, have hate and put hate out there and is a person of love. The Ole Miss-Mississippi State rivalry, in part, became the most spiteful rivalry in college football because of Hugh Freeze's actions. So that just runs counter already to what he is saying and what he is putting out there. Two, and look, the Auburn-Georgia rivalry has lost some of its luster, in my opinion, in part because Auburn has not won as often in recent years as it did certainly when I was growing up. The only time they seem to win this game anymore is when they score 40 points in a game. And they're certainly not going to do that on Saturday. And so, I think with Freeze, again, I'll say they probably didn't deserve to win at Cal. Cal missed about 3-4 field goals in that game and really shot itself in the foot. And then that final score on Saturday against A&M, I was able to watch most of that game. I had that and the Clemson game going at the same time. That final score says 27-10. It was a lot worse than that. You could have put Auburn out there for another 4 quarters, and I'm still not sure how many points they're going to score offensively. And for a guy whose calling card is his offensive acumen, for him to have that kind of a performance on Saturday, and as you point out, just a very strange press conference the week of, playing the number one team in the country, that's something where you'd think you'd want to be pretty buttoned up on that and make it aware of how serious you take everything and how aware of things you are. He had no problem referencing the fact that when they coached against each other in 2016, Hugh Freeze came away with a win that day. But, to sort of feign ignorance at everything else that has happened since then, it's just really strange to me. The Georgia-Auburn rivalry, look, if Hugh Freeze is probably being honest, he doesn't love the fact that he has to play both Alabama and Georgia every year now going forward. And so maybe, him saying, I'm not preaching hate, I don't want this to be, sort of a rivalry or things like that. Maybe that's him trying to grease the wheels with the SEC and say, hey, can we go to an 8-game schedule and not have to play Georgia every season? But, coming off a loss, and look, we know Auburn to be a notoriously fickle fan base. If Saturday gets ugly, I get that they've got to give Hugh Freeze some time to turn things around there. But, man, this is not how you want to be starting your tenure there at Auburn if you're Hugh Freeze.
Give me some good injury news, Connor.
I'm no doctor, so that'll be a little tough. I think this is a really big week for Ladd McConkey. They shut him down for the last 2 weeks, intentionally so, in hopes of getting him back. And I wrote about this a little bit yesterday. I think that's a guy Georgia needs. McConkey is a guy who, on fields with elite athletes in big games, LSU last year, Ohio State with his 2-point conversion, the TCU game, on fields with elite athletes in big games, Ladd McConkey has proven to be a difference maker, and you need as many of those guys as you can have. And if he misses another game with this back injury, you really start to wonder how much are we going to see of McConkey this season. Back injuries obviously can be tricky, and I'm sure Georgia's not considering surgery or anything like that at this point, but 5 straight games is a lot to miss with a back injury there, and it doesn't necessarily seem like Georgia's any closer to figuring out how can we get McConkey back out there fully ready to go. Defensively, I think they are going to be in a better shape. I would expect Michael Williams to be back out there this weekend. I think Javon Bullard is, I would say, certainly closer or a better bet than seeing Ladd out there at this point. If you get those two guys back on defense, I think you feel a lot better about what you're going to see going forward from Georgia. Running back room, we'll see. I will say I've liked what I've seen out of the combination of Dylan Bell, Dejon Edwards, and Cass Jones. I think those three guys complement each other very well. And so while, yes, you'd love to have Kendall Milton and Roderick Robinson out there just from a depth and also maybe a physicality standpoint, you've seen enough talent there from that running back room to I think, feel better about what you had than you certainly did 3 weeks ago.
Let me just ask you this real quickly as a follow-up on McConkey. Sometimes when Kirby Smart says about so-and-so injured player, we're hopeful to get him back. I think we have the sense, rightly or wrongly, that internally Georgia has a timeline about so-and-so player. They're just not necessarily looking to reveal that. In the case of McConkey, the sense that I get, both in terms of my observation of the situation, also maybe people that I've talked to, is perhaps this is a little murkier behind the scenes. This is not one of those deals where they're saying one thing, but deep down they know they want to have him back by so-and-so game. I get the sense that there is a little bit of murkiness around this. Do you get the sense that that's true, of they're perhaps a little less certain about when he will be healthy, and they truly are hopeful to get him back? The old line from Kirby Smart, in this case, maybe it really is true?
Yeah, to that point, I believe it was the UT Martin game. They thought, or it was UT Martin or Ball State, one of them, but they felt he was going to play. They practiced him during the week, and then Friday at the team hotel, his back just starts acting up, and they go and shut him down. And so it's one of those things where, on a week-to-week basis, you try and manage it the best you can. Again, clearly Georgia, revealing yesterday they had shut him down for 2 weeks. I think anticipation of getting him ready for this game. Again, back injuries can be so fickle, and I think Georgia is at least acknowledging that there. It's starting to turn into a little bit of the A.D. Mitchell situation from a season ago, where he ended up missing 9 games with an ankle injury. And now there are some behind-the-scenes stuff there that I think also contributed to Mitchell missing so much time. I don't believe that's the case with McConkey. I genuinely believe that he wants to be out there and wants to play. So we'll see. Mike McConkey has one career 100-yard receiving game. It came against Auburn in 2021, and if you're able to get him back out there and add him to this offense, I think that's only going to further make things easier for some of the other playmakers out there.
All right, very quick. I've kept you long, and I apologize. I want to squeeze in one more thing on a completely different subject. We're obviously very busy this week. Huge weekend for national teams this past weekend. Georgia got a rivalry game on Saturday. But the other news from Sunday that I don't think should get obscured because, frankly, it was a little bit of a punch in the gut, although not completely unexpected. Nykar's decommitment from Georgia, now going to visit Auburn. Florida State's in the mix. NIL rumors left and right. Connor, this is a pretty big blow to Georgia, I think. The one kind of final frontier they're trying to conquer as that elite wide receiver recruitment. And then lo and behold, one of the guys already in the mix sort of looked like he was blossoming into an elite receiver, and now he's leaving the class. There'd been chatter this might happen. Carr himself had even kind of somewhat alluded to that in an article at DawgNation.com. But nonetheless, this is pretty disappointing here. What do you make of another pretty big-time wide receiver here seemingly going to get away? I don't believe that Georgia gets back involved in this one, I don't think. What do you make of, kind of this situation here at the moment?
Yeah, I mentioned Miami as a team to very much consider there as well with Nykar. Look, wide receiver has been a position that Georgia, I don't think, has fully cracked yet. And, I think Brian McClendon is a good coach. I think you've seen some nice things with the way this position has developed with him there. But, I even think at this point it's beyond just blaming a specific position coach or an offensive coordinator. I just think it's a program-wide thing. And look, Georgia fans can say, oh, well, yeah, receivers aren't going to come here because you're not going to feature them, your leading pass catchers and tight end. Buck Bowers is one of the best players in the country. Yeah. And so, for the idea that this season that they should throw to the receivers more and less to Brock Bowers, you lose me right there if that's a talking point you have. Georgia does have options, and one thing I will note, you want to recruit well at the receiver position, and Georgia still, I think, has to crack that and figure it out. Having Dylan Raiola, having Ryan Puglisi hasn't exactly brought in those wide receivers like I think a lot of people thought. Well, yes, the transfer portal is still in its infancy, and Kirby Smart will caution against the idea that you're always going to be able to find what you're looking for in there. We've seen enough of this happening where wide receivers are going to be, players that are more prone to entering the transfer portal and looking elsewhere. Georgia's already, I think, reaped some of the benefits of that and bringing in Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas from the transfer portal. You look around the country, A.D. Mitchell going to Texas, and obviously that hurt Georgia there. But Florida State, their best wide receiver and maybe even their best player to this point, Keon Coleman, coming from Michigan State. you can find quality players from the transfer portal at the wide receiver position. Georgia has to be willing to commit to that and playing that game and getting those players. LSU with Malik Neighbors is certainly one to know as well there. So I do think that going forward, that is something to watch and monitor. But I think what Georgia is doing at the wide receiver recruiting position, look, it's probably a loss of 2024, and it's not a great thing there for this group. They're going to have to hit the portal hard once again next season. But there are options, but this is clearly, I think, bigger than just a wide receiver coach or just a one-off 2024 cycle. This is a program-wide thing at this point that Kirby Smart, I think, is really going to have to take time to try and figure out how does Georgia go about rectifying this issue.
Connor, good stuff. We'll look forward to reading plenty more from you there at DawgNation.com, and, of course, speak to you right back here at the same time next week on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
Yep, and before I go, I know it's been long already, but I want to give a shout-out to one of my best friends, Nathan Puckett. He's getting married this weekend. He's a longtime DawgNation supporter, went to DawgNation Invasion in New Orleans back in 2018. Yes, he's getting married on a fall Saturday. He had planned this wedding before it was known it was the Auburn game, but super excited to be here for them this weekend, and super excited to get to celebrate them this Saturday. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, Nathan, congratulations to you, and enjoy the weekend there, Connor. We appreciate that, and to everybody enjoying big things here this fall. Hope you have a great time with all of that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, truly, congratulations to Nathan there. That's an awesome piece of news. Hope he enjoys the wedding festivities here this weekend. And let me just say this real quickly about the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. We're going to talk more in a moment. Jamon Dumas-Johnson, the Georgia linebacker, said something yesterday that kind of raised some eyebrows a little bit. I think we're going to try to offer a little bit of an explanation for what JDJ, perhaps, why he said what he said about Georgia's hierarchy among rivalries. We're going to dive into this here coming up in a moment. We'll do a little bit of an investigation on all of that. But admittedly, I'm the kind of person that really likes rivals. I like rivalry games. I like that about college football. And it's a weird thing with Georgia being as good as it's been, a lot of these rivalry games don't seem to matter as much as they used to. Connor kind of pointed that out. And some of that's just basic strategy. I mentioned Will Ferrell earlier, basic strategery, right? It's like there are a lot of teams, they just want the Georgia game over with. They want to get past it. They want to try to stay as healthy as they can. They want to move on to a game they feel like they have a better chance of winning. And you can judge this yourself. Watch how many teams go for it on fourth down against Georgia over the course of a season. How many punts you see from inside Georgia territory. Teams that know they can't win play carefully because they don't want to get embarrassed. And there are a lot of teams that against Georgia, they're just trying to avoid being embarrassed. See if Auburn does that on Saturday itself. Just when it has a chance to be a little bit more aggressive and roll the dice, just kind of choosing not to do that as a hope of just kind of getting the game over with and moving on to a game and maybe have a better chance to win. But as someone who grew up in rivalries, and when I was growing up as a kid, Georgia was not really a national championship level program. The rivalry games is kind of all we really had. And so there's a part of me that kind of misses some of the vibe around some of these rivalry games. The Georgia-Auburn game is a part of that. The changing of the date, I think, has impacted that. But see if this doesn't happen. Now, I hope it doesn't happen, kind of. I mean, not even kind of. I hope what I'm about to say doesn't happen. But see if if it does happen, if this doesn't kind of make this game feel more like a rivalry again. Like, what did Kirby Smart say in the short clip we played for you a little bit earlier? The thing that makes this a rivalry for a lot of people is the fact that, hey, Auburn recruited Georgia players and Georgia recruited Auburn players. But in the last few years, how infrequently does that happen? It seems like that happens a lot less frequently than it used to. I mean, when Gus Malzahn was done at Auburn, by the time he was done, you could have drawn a circle no bigger than a quarter, and that was basically the geographic footprint that Auburn was recruiting in. They'd stopped recruiting Georgia. They'd stopped recruiting a lot of Alabama. They were kind of recruiting that area around the Auburn, program. They had a very small geographic area which they're bringing players in by the end of the Gus Malzahn era, and obviously Brian Harsin didn't recruit at all. So doesn't it kind of seem like it's been a long time, like Derek Brown 2016, something like that? Doesn't it seem like it's been kind of a long time since we've had really big Georgia-Auburn recruiting battles? And I know I'm forgetting some. Owen Popo is an example of that. There have been, a handful of these over the course of time. But y'all, I mean, most of us grew up at a time, at least people who are close to my age, most of us grew up at a time in which the Georgia-Auburn recruiting battles were the battles. They really haven't been going on as much. Well, now Auburn supposedly has a big NIL war chest. They're looking to spend some of that money. The sense that we get is they're going to spend some of that money here in the state of Georgia. And so let's see if that doesn't spice up the Georgia-Auburn rivalry again. Now, as I said before, I don't want that to happen. I don't want Auburn to win recruiting battles. But Could be that in future years we see the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, assuming it's still played every year. It could be that we see that rivalry kind of mattering a little bit more if Auburn develops a little bit more of an inroad into the state of Georgia with recruiting, something it hasn't quite had in some time. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, Auburn folks, they're invited to go on Royal Caribbean cruises too, I guess. But we're more focused on the Georgia fans enjoying themselves on our DawgNation cruise. April of 2024, on board Allure of the Seas. RoyalDogs.com, the website our good friend Jessica Slater's put together that tells you all about the Oasis class ship we're going to be on, Allure of the Seas, the ports of call we're visiting, Nassau in the Bahamas, Perfect Day, Coco Cay, that wonderful private island in the Bahamas exclusively for those on Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations, and all the specially themed DawgNation events there as well. So please check out the website. It is RoyalDogs.com, RoyalDogs.com. You can find out more about that. April of 2024. We can't wait to see you there. All right, let's talk about the Associated Press poll here for a moment, because one of the things that you see is the Georgia schedule is slightly getting more interesting now on the basis of who is ranked of future Georgia opponents here at the moment. Ole Miss stays in the poll. Should they still be ranked? I'm not quite so sure, and they probably won't be after this Saturday if they lose to LSU. But for now, they're still 20th. That's a Georgia opponent. Tennessee is still ranked 21st. Not quite so sure they should be ranked either, but nonetheless, they are in there. That's a future Georgia opponent. Florida is in the AP poll now at a 3-1 record. They're ranked 22nd. How about Missouri at 4-0? Now, they probably should have been ranked last week. So, sometimes, some of these SEC teams may get a little bit of an extra nod, the likes of an Ole Miss maybe here right now. But Missouri probably should have been ranked a week ago for beating Kansas State. Now they are in after being 4-0. And undefeated Kentucky is not ranked, but they are second amongst teams receiving votes here right now. So, for a Georgia schedule that on paper to begin the season did not look very impressive, and admittedly so, I would say, well, all of a sudden now there's a little bit more juice to it, right? I mean, 4 ranked opponents, that's not nothing, assuming that these teams, or at least a combination equal to 4, can stay in the rankings. And I'm actually excited for this next phase of the Georgia schedule. 99% of college football fans, most of the overwhelming majority of the sport, all they do is just hope their team wins. There's very little in the way of, we won, but was it dominant? Most college football teams don't really think that way. College football fan bases don't really think that way. So I think now, Georgia fans have a chance to relax during this next portion of the schedule. It's not beauty contest judging Georgia and UT Martin of, Georgia didn't score 90 points, so does that mean Georgia's ready for whoever they're going to have to play next? You don't have to do that anymore. Now you're on the road at Auburn. In a roundabout way, just winning sort of enough. If you can run through Missouri and Kentucky and Ole Miss and Tennessee, Florida, these games that you have over the course of the next few weeks after that, if you're winning those games, you're kind of doing your job. And you're setting yourself up for where you need to be next. And come December and January, obviously you have to be playing way better than you have been playing, but you've also got a couple of months to get you ready for that. And the games that you do play do in some ways get you ready for it. We knew to begin the year that September was going to kind of be I mean, I even said that on Saturday. It's like I'm just ready for what's next. Not because I'm not thankful that Georgia's been great or I'm too hard to please. Honestly, I really don't feel like I am that hard to please. I'm generally a pretty happy person. But I think what we're about to see from Georgia is going to be far more entertaining. Seeing how they handle this road environment on Saturday. Seeing if they can start racking up wins weeks after weeks after weeks against SEC competition. I think that's pretty fun, and I'm ready to kind of see it. I think that should be a really good thing. Now, on a Tuesday, oftentimes we also have some sort of leftover residue that we did not get to discuss from the previous weeks. I want to at least mention a couple of these here real quick, and then I want to get back exclusively to Georgia here in a moment. Starting with the SEC, I was a little bit surprised that we kind of seemingly saw LSU sort of take a little bit of a turn back to less than elite status. I thought LSU was pretty impressive in how they handled Mississippi State on the road 2 Saturdays ago. This past weekend, though, closer than I expected to be against Arkansas. You'll give Sam Pittman and his charges some credit for really going on the road and giving themselves a chance to win that, kind of last-second field goal gave LSU the win there. So Arkansas played a pretty good football game. So those of us who like Sam Pittman are certainly happy to see that. They actually scored more points than I thought Arkansas was probably capable of scoring here right now. But for LSU, they do survive, they do win, but kind of leaves them, kind of in that sort of hard to figure out category here right now, moving off the loss from Florida State into SEC play. The Magnolia Bowl on Saturday is going to be fascinating. That's the LSU Ole Miss game. We're going to probably end up talking a pretty good bit about that. That's a good time there. Y'all know that I'm not impressed by Lane Kiffin and not very impressed by Ole Miss overall, but they can change some of that. If you can beat Brian Kelly and LSU, you can change some of that. I think that in the case of Jaden Daniels, the quarterback who had been so impressive in the win against Mississippi State, he also seemed to kind of regress a little bit against Arkansas. So we'll see if that ongoing story adds another extra chapter to it. But LSU did win, not an overwhelmingly impressive win, setting itself up for a game against Ole Miss on Saturday that should be pretty interesting. And also, we've talked about the Ryan Day part of the Notre Dame and Ohio State game, the shouting and the yelling at 86-year-old Lou Holtz and how embarrassing that was. But honestly, all of the histrionics from Day, that does distract us from a little bit about the fact that Notre Dame had 10 players on the field on defense for the final 2 plays of the game. That's bad. That's really, really bad. And the explanation that Freeman's tried to offer, and admittedly there really isn't a good explanation for this. There is, I think, a natural tendency to want to be a little bit face-saving during all of this. But his explanation's not much better. And I don't quite know what you do about that. Now, one huge blunder like that doesn't damn you forever as a coach. I certainly acknowledge that. But you got to be careful. You got to be really, really careful because at the very least, you got to have 11 players in the field. You just do. And it still makes it just so dumb that Ohio State's like, hey, look how tough we are. We barely punched it over the goal line. I'm talking about just the smallest little bit when the other team only had 10 players. I think Notre Dame also had a timeout, too. They didn't call a timeout. That's a pretty sizable blunder there, a pretty big mess up. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, before we get back to Georgia here, let me also remind you, if you're coming into the Atlanta area, your travels require you to be in downtown or Buckhead, Midtown, somewhere like that, but maybe you don't want to stay in the hustle and bustle of the downtown Atlanta scene. A great place to stay is right here where you broadcast from each and every day, right here in the Dunwoody area. I want to give you a website to go to find out more about this. It's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. And you can find out about why this Dunwoody area of kind of this wonderful Atlanta suburb is such a wonderful place to be, because you're talking about a couple thousand different hotel rooms to choose from, which means you get really great prices. You got a couple of hundred restaurants, everything from fine dining to fast casual and everything else in between. You have hundreds of shopping opportunities there as well. Beautiful mall and all kinds of great shopping experience all around here. And it's not quite as crowded. It's very safe. It's just a wonderful place to be right here in the Dunwoody area. And if you need to get into downtown or Buckhead, somewhere like that, we're also nestled in between a couple of different MARTA stations there too. So super convenient access to airport or downtown or midtown or Buckhead, wherever else. So go to the website. It's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. Heard from a great group of DawgNation folks of the day. Hey, B.A., we heard you talking about Dunwoody. We came to stay. And so folks are having a good time. They're enjoying all of that. And so you can there as well. All right. Now, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, let's turn our attention back to Georgia just for a moment. And perhaps a little bit of an eye-opening statement yesterday from Georgia linebacker Jamon Dumas-Johnson. Now, JDJ had a really wide-ranging press conference evaluating his own play thus far this season, the play of the Georgia defense. That's worth hearing, and that's more serious and football-minded. This is a little bit less serious on all of that. But he was asked yesterday about the sheer number of the Georgia rivals and how he chooses to rank them, and something that Pop, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, said got some attention. Now, we think we have some extra context here on this, but nonetheless, here is Jamon Dumas-Johnson with a little bit of a statement on Georgia's rivals that got and drew some curiosity from Georgia fans. Here is the one they call Pop.
So many great rivalries with this program. Obviously, Tech in Florida, Tennessee. Well, I'm curious where you put the Auburn rivalry.
I put Auburn probably at, I don't know, this is my second year here. Third year here, so I know for sure Coach B mad if I don't put Georgia Tech first. So Georgia Tech definitely first. I think Auburn probably second. Yeah, Georgia Tech had to be first.
All right, a couple things here. Now, obviously, Jamon Dumas-Johnson's a beloved member of this Georgia defense, a very important leader from the linebacking core, but even Jamon Dumas-Johnson should understand the one thing you don't want to do is get on Eddie's bad side here. Eddie may be blind, but even he can see that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. So Jamon Dumas-Johnson, be very careful that you don't draw the ire of Eddie the blind squirrel there on that. That's just one quick aside for you on that. But the other thing that kind of opened some eyes, sorry, Eddie, but opened some eyes about what Jamon Dumas-Johnson says there is the idea that Kirby Smart would want to make sure that he said Georgia Tech first. The assumption being made that therefore that Kirby Smart must believe that Georgia Tech is the biggest rival that Georgia has. Now, Kirby's always very careful to kind of not rank any rival over the rest of them. But in terms of why JDJ would think that Kirby thinks that Tech is the biggest rivalry, I think we have a little bit of an explanation for this. The honest truth is Georgia Tech is not Georgia's biggest rival. It's just not. Now, 60 years ago, was it? Probably. Is it the biggest rivalry now? It's not. I believe wholeheartedly that you want to set your rivalry bar as high as you possibly can. That if your biggest rival is Georgia Tech, then your aspirations are sometimes no better than just being better than Georgia Tech. Well, Tech's 2-2 right now. You clearly want to be far better than that, so you want to try to set your rivalry bar as high as you possibly can. Historically, that's kind of why we've kind of pushed for the Florida rivalry to be the big one. Now, Florida used to be good. A lot of folks not old enough to remember that. But at one point in time, many, many years ago, Florida was actually really a good team. And so, therefore, setting that as the high bar for your rivalry just meant that Georgia could aspire to a level of greatness that kind of made sense. And so that's kind of where that comes from us. But nonetheless, Georgia Tech is not Georgia's biggest rival, nor do I believe that Kirby Smart actually thinks that it is. So why did JDJ say what he said? You know how Kirby Smart does here, right? It's like every week Georgia's trying to find its different level of motivation, its new level of motivation. And I think that Jamon Dumas-Johnson, being from Maryland, I think going into the Tech game last year, I think he had it pounded into him about, this is a rivalry, this is a rivalry, this is a rivalry. Because the honest truth is, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, way up there in the kind of the Beltway, Mid-Atlantic area, he'd probably never even heard of Georgia Tech, at least for the most part. So I think he had to have it like pounded into his head of, hey, this game matters, because Georgia's kind of always trying to find that level of motivation for every game that it plays. In fact, we went back and found this. Jamon Dumas-Johnson talking about Tech last year. Why does JDJ think Kirby Smart thinks that Tech is Georgia's biggest rival? Because last year's way of getting Georgia players fired up to play Georgia Tech at the end of the season, something they had not done at that point in time in a couple of years, I think they probably exaggerated the nature of the Tech game. In fact, here is some evidence of Jamon Dumas-Johnson seemingly reflecting that from last November.
I knew in the 90s it was kind of back and forth, but lately it's been, all Georgia winning the rivalry so far. That's all I know pretty much about the rivalry. I just know when Coach Smart first came here, we lost, and kind of during his era, he most likely lost to him.
So that's, to me, sounds like a player that's gotten a heavy dose of the history of the Georgia Tech rivalry. I mean, he's talking about that thing like it's the Packers and the Bears, right? Like, oh my gosh, this thing going back to the 90s was whatever. And admittedly, Kirby Smart did lose some games, there in that series. And so I'm sure he used that to try to fire up the players, for last year. In the case of Jamon Dumas-Johnson, it seemed to have worked. But I would advise any Georgia Tech folks who may have struggled into the program today, don't get too excited. I can promise you no one around Athens right now thinks you're the Georgia's biggest rival. Jamon Dumas-Johnson perhaps thinks that because of some motivational ploys that were used a year ago. But the overall hierarchy is still, we would say Florida number 1, Auburn a very deserving number 2 after that, but there'll be no shortage of rivalry energy for Georgia on Saturday. Hugh Freeze may not know how to talk about this game, but here in DawgNation, we definitely do. For the Deep South's oldest, Georgia will be more than ready. Because that's what great coaches do. They get their teams ready to play games like this, and we have more evidence of just how great a coach Kirby Smart is. Joel Sidney Kelly gets our golden shoe for today. Joel's a very talented graphic artist, and he put together a wonderful graphic here. So these are the most successful head coaches through their first 100 games, according to Joel, who shared this. Is amazing. So George Woodruff, is that Penn? Is that where he coached? Or is that's Penn, right? Penn, not Princeton. That's Penn, right? 94-6 from 1892 through 1900. Frank Leahy at Notre Dame, 95-5 from 39 through 49. Barry Switzer at Oklahoma. That's someone that most of us have some recollection of, at least if you're close to my age. 86-11-3. Newt Rockne, 85-10-5. And then Kirby Smart, 85-15. How about that? Kirby Smart mentioned along the lines of a Newt Rockne and a Barry Switzer. What an amazing start to his career. Wonderful golden shoe by Joel Sidney Kelly, which both educates and entertains us. That's great to see. Very, very good stuff there. Speaking of Georgia rivals, about the lousy, stinking Gators. 32 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beaten up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. R.S. Andrews will show up on time. They will do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust all of them. I should say you can trust them for all of that here today. All right, we went very long on comments yesterday, so we got some stuff to take care of today. Not going to be able to go quite as long today, but we're glad to have you here, and we'll dive in, get these comments rolling, and see how you're all doing. All right, let's get it going here. As a part of our 1st and 15 here. Jenna Smith says, not looking forward to Texas and Oklahoma moving to the SEC. It ruins our rivalry games we love, plus I can't stand Texas. Jenna, I understand where you're coming from on that. There's no doubt that the SEC bringing in some new teams is going to change the nature of this league, and if the SEC can't come to an agreement with ESPN on, more compensation for a 9th conference game, I think there's a very good chance the SEC doesn't play the 9 conference games, which means that moving forward in the future, we probably won't see Georgia-Auburn on a yearly basis anymore. And I truly think something will be lost by that. There's a certain degree of progress, I guess, by adding Texas and Oklahoma to the league, but if you're trading what has mattered for this new stuff, then at that point in time, all you really are is kind of a conglomerate of aligned media rights interests, and that doesn't sound very interesting and very fun. So I kind of agree with you on that. Thomas Dew says, can Georgia cover against Auburn this Saturday afternoon? I think that it can. I mean, look, I haven't formed my specific official opinion on Georgia minus the, 16.5 here right now against Auburn. But here's what I'll tell you, is that Georgia was 8-7 against the spread a year ago, right? Georgia's not going to go winless against the spread for the year. Georgia will either start playing better relative to expectations, or expectations will eventually evolve. Like the market will catch up to Georgia one way or another eventually, or Georgia will catch up with the market. One of those two things is going to happen, is that the Georgia covers are coming either because Georgia gets, from a power rating standpoint, downgraded, or because Georgia kind of shakes off the doldrums and starts meeting expectations and kind of regresses back towards the median a little bit. One way or another, we got some Georgia covers coming at some point in time because that's just the way that it goes. You can be 15-0 or 0-15 on the field, but you are very unlikely to be 0-15 or 15-0 in the spread. Let's see what else. Enrique Murillo predicts that Georgia will have almost double the amount of offensive plays and time of possession. Book it. Enrique, that's a strong prediction. By the way, it's great to have you in the comment section today. It feels like we haven't seen you in a little while. At least if am I right about that? Maybe I'm wrong. It's going to require some good rushing attack to do that. I thought Connor was interesting earlier, saying that he's actually kind of like that sort of three-headed monster of Dejon Edwards is kind of your primary back with the Cash Jones, Dylan Bell stuff kind of mixed in between. The comparison that's been made before is a little bit of the, Dylan Bell's like your Debo Samuel. Well, if that's the case, you wonder, do you show some of that Debo Samuel style stuff with him on Saturday, more so than just traditional running plays? The point I'm getting to is that if you're going to control the clock and control the time of possession, that means a little bit more success on the ground for Georgia. And, seeing if this team is ready to do that would certainly be pretty interesting. Good to see Darius Smith Sr. in the comment section today. I tell you, Darius, when we've seen him in the field thus far, has really looked good. Really looked good. I'm not a scout. I don't pretend to be an evaluator of talent, but I like what I see. Big, tall, quick pass rusher off the edge like that. I like a lot of what we're seeing from Darius Smith right now. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says that there's a lot of Beck hate out there, fair or not. I've seen some of that. I mean, to me, it's a lot of the same stuff that was out there about Stetson a year ago, or really the last couple of years, I guess. I just think that the intensity related to the subject matter turns the volume up on some opinions higher than they should be. I just think that's what it comes down to, is that Georgia football and college football is really fun for a lot of us. I love to immerse myself in college football. I love to get into all the craziness of it all. I just love it. And when you love it as much as some of us do, I think one of the byproducts of that sometimes is it turns the opinions up a little louder than they possibly should be. The appropriate response to Beck is to have no hot take whatsoever. He's only started 4 games. He's going to start his first SEC road game on Saturday. He may end up being very good. He may end up not being very good at all. The most likely outcome is that the Georgia starting quarterback is pretty similar to what Georgia starting quarterbacks have typically been. This is the thing, that if you took the average of Carson Beck's Stetson Bennett's couple of years, Jake Fromm's years, and you sort of added all that together, averaged it up, that's about what Carson Beck's going to likely be. And that means if his numbers seem worse than that, they'll eventually get better. And if his numbers seem better than that, they'll eventually kind of regress back to that. That there is a track record for performance at the position for Georgia. When it's all said and done, that's about what Carson Beck will likely be. Some of the people who, based on 5 throws as a backup quarterback, had to determine he was going to be a first-round pick, that was always nonsense. And some of the people who had determined that, based on a few bad throws, he doesn't even need to start, that's probably nonsense too. Then when it's all said and done, Beck has been tabbed as the Georgia starting quarterback, so he will likely perform within a standard deviation or so of what a typical Georgia starting quarterback sort of looks like. He'll be probably fine. He may be better than that. He may end up being better than Stetson Bennett. He may end up being a little bit worse than Jake Fromm. He may end up being a little worse, whatever, but he's going to be somewhere in that neighborhood of what typical Georgia starting quarterbacks have been. That's what's likely to be true because we've got a fairly substantial track record here now. Jenna Smith says, I want a hungry, take no prisoners defense again. Yeah, we'll see how much that we see on Saturday. It could be a good day for the Georgia defense because obviously Auburn's had some struggles. Crow King says that Beck's played well and he's been smart with the football. Only issue is he's adjusted being the starter and makes his progressions too quickly sometimes, doesn't notice the better play. Yeah, perhaps that's true. I mean, maybe that's the case. I don't know that I think I'm smart enough to necessarily evaluate that, but Crow King, what you're saying maybe makes some sense. I also think he's a better player when Ladd McConkey's on the field. I do, because I think that Ladd knows how to get behind defenses. Free Durden says, I like Bell, but Paul looks like a complete back. I think he certainly could be, but keep in mind, the comparison that Kirby Smart has made with Andrew Paul was Nick Chubb in terms of his injury recovery, which means the Paul we have right now is perhaps the Chubb of circa 2016, a guy who was good, but not as good as he was prior to the injury and not as good as he would be a year later. In other words, I think the issue you're going to run into with Chubb here a little bit right now, the issue you're going to run into with Paul a little bit right now is he's probably somewhat limited compared to his full skill set because he's only a year or so removed from that injury. All right, let's see what else. David Faulkner says, have a great Bulldog day, everybody. David, appreciate that. Killian Worthy says, does Carson have that fire in his belly that you need to win a championship? That's what the fan base is asking. It's a fair question, but Killian, let's talk about this out loud for a moment. Aren't some positions a little bit different? It's like I want my defensive lineman to be driven by a fire in his belly. I don't know that I want my quarterback driven that way. Because not to say that I don't want my quarterback to be a competitor, but that sort of like frothing in the mouth, fire in your belly. I want my defensive end to play that way. I want my running back to play that way. I probably want my left tackle to play that way. But some of my quarterback, I don't know that I want that guy, like who was the quarterback in the NFL a few years ago that did the headbutt and got injured? Like, I don't know that I want my quarterback doing that. Like, who I think has a fire in his belly? Baker Mayfield's got a fire in his belly. He's always trying to prove somebody wrong. Baker Mayfield's also worried about the wrong things a lot, too. I mean, Mayfield seems to be one of these guys who's like a little extra sometimes out there, a little too fired up, a little too much of a chip on his shoulder when perhaps, just being a little bit more, calm and collective might serve him a little bit better. I don't know that I want my quarterback to be driven by, boy, that guy's got a fire in his belly. He's always trying to prove, people wrong. I don't know that I want that. I mean, in some respects, I want my quarterback to be the guy that calms everybody down just a little bit, right? Now, you got to want to compete, but when it's all said and done, the famous Aaron Rodgers line, I want my quarterback capable of delivering the RELAX. Hey, everybody relax. I want my quarterback capable of doing that. So there is an aspect to Beck's demeanor, which I think you kind of like. Now, his teammates are in the process of probably judging him. They're in the process of deciding, hey, do we want to play for this guy? Do we truly believe in this guy? But to say that his demeanor needs to be the same as, like, say, Zion Logue, like one of my favorite players to watch pre-snap is Zion Logue. Like, talk about fire in his belly. Zion Logue's got a fire in his belly, man. He's pumping up. He's getting everybody going. Like, I want Zion Logue doing that stuff on the interior of the defensive line. I don't know that I want Carson Beck behaving that same way as a quarterback. Scotty Barnes says, I want my quarterback to have swagger. Now, this is one of those things, Scotty, I would agree with you too, but I'll also go back to stuff that Jake Fromm and I have talked about, is I don't want fake swagger. I don't want, fake on that. Like, that's one of those things, it's gross. Like, fake swagger is just gross. Trying to pretend that you're something you're not is just not good. And so I think right now, Carson Beck, has the appropriate level of swagger for his current resume. So when you see him pregame last 2 weeks, Carson's had and you can go watch our DawgNation dog walk videos on the DawgNation YouTube page. Carson has had a very, what I would think of as pretty flashy fashion sense, pretty bold suits, right? He's had some fun with what he's worn into the stadium. I think that's fine. You're right. You're the starting quarterback. People are looking at you anyway. Give them something to look at. I don't have a problem with that. But if Beck is giving me like the money sign, the mic drop sign, if he's giving me that kind of stuff right now when he's done zilch, that to me is a higher level of swagger for his current resume. Beck seems confident, seems poised, seems relaxed, and as he has more on-field accomplishments, he may give you a little bit more of like the visible swagger. He may give you more of that. But right now, too much of that would seem ill-placed. Too much of it. Now, he gave you the wink during the halftime video the other day. We made a big deal about that. Once again, that seems like an appropriate level of swagger for his current level of accomplishment. In other words, I'm kind of new at this, but I feel like I got it. Like, that's appropriate. But if he's out there doing Stetson minute mic drop or like Johnny Manziel, money sign, goodness knows I don't want him painting his fingernails like Caleb Williams. But if he's out there doing a bunch of stuff like that, I think a lot of us would be like, yeah, not yet. Let's do something first. Let's do something first, and then do whatever you want to do. Go out and achieve something, and then after that, you can have your own, catchphrase or whatever you want. So I agree with you that I want my quarterback to have a certain degree of swagger. We've always kind of thought of quarterback as being like the popular kid, right? And you kind of want the quarterback to be that. But that's got to come from a place of earning it. You could be confident, but if you're going to have swagger, that better be related to something. It's like, I like Shedeur Sanders, but the whole like watch thing and things like that, I don't know yet. Let's see. Let's see where this goes first before we're going to have a lot of catchphrases and gimmicks and things like that. Let's do something first. So I think that swagger is one of those things that you earn after tangible accomplishments. Philip Jordan Wells says Carson Beckson is a cool customer so far this year, and that's just about how he goes about his business. As long as there's zero mistakes, we Gucci, which is the same thing as saying everything's fine, which I think is correct on the part of Philip Jordan Wells to say that. Yeah, and I do think that's true, is that it is not easy being relaxed in a situation. What's the line? If like you can keep your head when everybody's around you is losing theirs or whatever the line is. Like, Beck is relaxed in a situation that doesn't lend itself to always being relaxed. He deserves credit for that. Tim Tatum says there was a reason that Joe Montana was nicknamed Joe Cool back in the day. That's exactly right. Exactly right. And I think of like sometimes we sort of treat coolness and swagger as synonyms, But I think of them as different things. Like, it's okay to be cool prior to achieving something. In fact, being cool probably helps you achieve something. But it's not okay to have swagger prior to achieving something. Swagger prior to achievement sort of feels like pride before the fall to me. Like, it sort of feels like the kind of thing that eventually gets jerked out of you. Coolness prior to achievement, that's the kind of thing we all aspire to, I think. Jamie Huff says, I'm speaking like a true live your life like I do type guy. I'm not sure what that means. Joseph Kennedy says that Stetson Bennett had that mic drop swagger, but he also kind of earned it, I guess. Now, I think that Stetson, we're led to believe, was pretty cocky prior to ever having any tangible achievements, but the swagger seemed to make sense when he's doing big things, Tennessee game, things like that, for instance. Stuff like that seemed to make sense because he was actually achieving something. And as Beck has more tangible accomplishments, my guess is he will rightly and deservedly so show more swagger. Bell Jones says quarterbacks need ice water in their veins. That's true. I mean, it's just hard to handle that pressure. It is hard to handle that pressure. Kickers as well. By the way, Georgia will, I'm guessing, have to try to kick a field goal or so on Saturday. We'll see how Woodring handles that. DT says Baker Mayfield got a second dose of the Georgia Bulldogs last night. DT, he sure did. Senior Dog 54 says Carson Beck, not an easy guy to figure out. I don't think we'll know what we have in him until he has to be the man in the fourth quarter. That may happen several times before the season's over. Yeah. So, as I said earlier, my best guess is that from a performance standpoint, Carson's going to probably end up being pretty similar to what other Georgia quarterbacks have been. There's just sort of a inherent value that certain positions have. You know, the center fielder for the New York Yankees, right? Over the course of 10 years, there's a certain value in performance that position typically produces, and next year it should be something pretty close to that. The same thing with the Georgia quarterback. There is a certain inherent value in that position based on previous year's track record. My guess is Beck eventually gets closer to that. But the point that you're bringing is a pretty good one. The one thing that will make Carson a little bit different is that he may play in some closer games, and therefore every throw that he makes in these closer games will be more magnified. And so our evaluation and judgment of him could end up being a little bit different. Did we lose everything here? Oh, there we go. That our evaluation and judgment of him will end up being different because he's going to be playing in games in which his throws are going to matter more, because Georgia, on the basis of the way it's playing right now, you'd be led to believe it may play in a few more close games. Dave Snow just hopes that Beck gets a chance to demonstrate some swagger the rest of the season. I like that. AJ Ferrara on the subject of fall weddings. He says, I've got 3 that I'm going to, including one this weekend. I'm happy for my friends and family, but best believe I'll have the game on my phone under the table. Yeah, so like the thing I have about fall weddings is, and I know it's like a big, like online topic. Obviously, people don't like them. Like the one thing that I'll say about that is like if you're like the happy couple here, the couple getting married, the bride, you got to know is that people are going to be at your wedding thinking about football, and that's the one thing I would be. I know the weather's better, and people have the these dreams of like these fall weddings because it's not 10 million degrees the way that it is in the summertime. I do get that part of it, but even if that made it way better to have a fall wedding. I mean, the idea that the entire reception is nothing but people on phones or gathered around a TV in the corner somewhere, that to me is pretty tough. I mean, that would be a kind of a pretty tough thing to deal with, I think. It's also one of those things too. It's like, so Connor is a good bit younger than I am, obviously, and so he is in the stage of life where it seems like Connor's going to a lot of weddings. And when I was his age, I was also going to a lot of weddings. It's like you kind of go these ebbs and flows in life of, when you're young, you're never going to a wedding because kids don't go to weddings. Then you get a little older, all of a sudden now it's your friends getting married. You're going to weddings all the time. Like when I was in my 20s, went to weddings seemed like every week. Everybody's getting married. And then now you kind of get out of that stage where like the last wedding that I had a relative got married a couple weeks ago, but I was working, not able to go. But the last wedding that I've been to, how long has it been since I've been to a wedding? It just sort of seems like you get to an age where you're not really going to a lot of weddings, and then you get a little older, and all of a sudden now your friends' kids are getting married all the time, or it's your own kids. It just sort of seems like weddings sort of ebb and flow throughout life. I'm definitely in sort of one of those, I guess, ebb times where I'm not really going to a ton of weddings here right now. All right, let's take one more trip around the comment section, then we've got to go. Let's see what else. I can't even tell what they're talking about on YouTube here right now. I can't even tell. Yeah, I can't even tell what they're even talking about over there. Jonathan Aaron says, check out the clip from the Pat McAfee show. They had the guy who impersonates Lou Holtz responding to Ryan Day. It's a good one. I'll check that out, Jonathan. That's very funny because we actually played the thing that kind of got all this started from going back to Friday. It's just so silly that Ryan Day used this for like fake, phony outrage because it could not have been intended to be less serious than it was. Jeremy Harbin also talking about the Falcons taking Bijan Robinson over Jalen Carter. I mean, obviously right now Carter has the look of one of the great defensive players in the league. He does. I think thankfully for the Falcons, Bijan Robinson has certainly been a very exciting player. And Bijan's going to be popular in Atlanta, right? So they may get somewhat forgiven for not taking Carter by the fact that Bijan's going to probably be pretty popular with Falcons fans. You're about to see those number 7s, around town again. But it's sort of like, this is what you could have done with Todd Gurley a few years ago. It's like you take Vic Beasley instead of Todd Gurley. You could have had the version that Bijan could hope to be with Gurley a few years ago. You didn't do that, and now you're missing the game change. I'm talking about game changing defensive player in Jalen Carter. So you can take sort of like the new version of what Gurley's already proven to be, and Bijan would have to be amazing to be as good as Gurley was those first couple of years he was here. So yeah. Johnny Surfdog says Jalen Carter should have been number 1 overall. From a talent standpoint, no doubt that's the case. Cassie Turner says she had a friend that chose her wedding date to be the day after the Florida game with her in mind. She even said that she didn't want to do it on a Saturday just for me. See, Cassie, that's a good friend right there. And it's clearly that you're having a positive influence on her life. That's good. I like that, Cassie. Matt Presley says, thoughts on the front 7, the ability to get pressure. Let's judge that group when everybody's out there. You didn't have McHale on Saturday. He's your best. You didn't have Marvin Jones the previous week. I still think he's going to be heard from in a pretty big way. Georgia's also kind of shown it's not afraid to like bring those interior linebacker blitzes. Hasn't had a reason, I should say, to do that as of yet. In the biggest games that Georgia's played last couple of years, they've gotten after quarterbacks pretty well. They got after Spencer Rattler pretty well a couple of weeks ago. And keep this in mind. While Georgia's first month of the season has been kind of it's been okay, the performance specifically against Rattler looks better and better because Spencer Rattler's a good quarterback. Rattler had a very good first quarter. Georgia really handled him for 3 quarters. Rattler, I believe, and we even kind of said this at the time, but it's proving to be more and more true. Rattler, I believe, is going to go on to a really good season. So what Georgia did in shutting him down, I think deserves to be reconsidered and given full credit here. So use the South Carolina game, the good pass rush that Georgia had against Rattler, as perhaps some evidence that Georgia may have enough of what it needs when it plays better quarterbacks the rest of the way. All right. Nature Gator says when Day goes high, I go low voice-wise, LOL. Yeah, that's about right, Nature. That's about right. A little falsetto at his expense to have some fun. DT says Georgia needs to keep Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, South Carolina in its SEC schedule. Yeah, I'm going to miss those teams not being on there for sure. Mitt Layton, good commenter, says, I usually agree with you 99% of the time, but I have to disagree with your picking Florida State yesterday as the number 1 if UGA wasn't. He says they almost lost to Boston College. That barely beat Holy Cross by 3, and Clemson missed a chip shot to win at the end of the game. He says my pick would be Washington or Texas. It's an interesting conversation, Mitt. Here's what I'll tell you, and Connor kind of alluded to this when he mentioned Washington a little earlier. I don't know that anyone's played like more dominantly throughout the entire season than Washington has thus far. But I have a sneaking suspicion that Michigan State has totally quit on the season. I don't think people have fully appreciated the fact. I imagine their players are not super happy with what's happened to Mel Tucker. fairly or not, my guess is that Michigan State players have a little bit different take on that situation behind the scene. Who knows what the truth is? I certainly won't pretend to. But we saw Michigan State lay an egg again last week against Maryland. So the point is that we're seeing Washington be dominant right now, but we haven't really judged them against the best teams they're going to play as of yet. But I would have Washington in my top 4. And I'm okay with Texas here too. You know, Texas very quietly handled Baylor pretty easily. You know, one of the knocks on Texas the last few years has been losing to teams they're not supposed to. Well, they didn't play around with Baylor at all on Saturday. So I had Texas in my playoff before the year began. I've got no problem with Texas here through these first 4 games. I think my point here, though, is, and Florida State did get 3 votes, number 1 in the AP poll this week. I think that Florida State's get the best 2 wins so far this year. Neutral against LSU, road against Clemson. Those are the best 2 wins. And I do think the Clemson win is still a high-quality win. Yeah, they played pretty close against Boston College. That's true. But it's the quality of wins right now for Florida State I don't think anybody can match. I'd probably give my top 4 in the same order, a similar order to what you mentioned. I'd go Georgia 1, Florida State 2. I'd go Texas 3, Washington 4. That's what I'd do right now. And I'd go Ohio State 5. That'd be my top 5 right now. And if somebody said on the basis of resume they're going to, for now, put Florida State ahead of Georgia, I wouldn't argue with that a ton. I really wouldn't, because I do value their resume, and it sounds like I like their resume more than you do. But that's what I'd go. I'd go Georgia 1, Florida State 2, Texas 3, Washington 4, Ohio State 5. That's what I'd do. I think as much as I make fun of Ohio State, they went on the road and won at Notre Dame. That's a pretty good performance. But let me just say this really quick, and then we're going to leave. Here's the thing that's interesting about this season right now, and everybody's talking about this, and I believe it's true. We've got all 5 Power 5 conferences very much in play for this playoff right now. Florida State is a very real playoff contender in the ACC. Miami's pretty good right now, too. We've got Texas as a very real playoff contender in the Big 12. Watch Oklahoma. Oklahoma, not amazing in beating Cincinnati on Saturday, but pretty quietly, Oklahoma's taking care of business. They're playing better defensively. Eventually, I think they switched to the freshman quarterback, Jackson Arnold, and I believe he probably becomes the guy that leads their offense at some point in time this year. They got Oklahoma, Texas coming up in a couple of weeks. That's a pretty fun game. But right now, the Big 12 is very much alive in the playoff race. The Pac-12, and I know people make a big deal about this because it's the final year of the league, that's a good conference right now. Like USC is probably the 4th, 5th best team in the league, perhaps. Washington State's undefeated. Washington's played well. Utah, all they do is keep winning. There are more teams alive right now. And I think eventually it all pretty much gets back to normal. And when it's all said and done, it's the same 4 or 5 teams it usually is. But for now, it's really wide open here right now. This is a fun college football season thus far. I think it's been pretty fun. So, and we'll see how Georgia continues to fit into all of this. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. Y'all have a great day. And if your water heater goes out, remember RS Andrews can replace it for you in many cases the same day. Just find them online at rsandrews.com. We will talk to you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. That's 10 a.m. across all platforms, 9:45 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation DawgNation app, and of course when it's all said and done for our RS Andrews cool down. We'll see you tomorrow.